CDC, various departments of health are saying that these water damaged buildings are unhealthy. I think we're getting closer for these agencies to be telling people why. A, because this type of science is becoming very much so more prevalent. It's not necessarily readily accessible yet. However, Normie talks about this, and through its teaching is getting more and more professionals to become aware of this. And so therefore that bridge across the Grand Canyon is being built. These are unhealthy environments. Here's why, and here's what we should be looking at to solve the problem conclusively. When we understand the built environment and how that has changed since the 1970s. Well, today people are spending so much more time indoors, right? Agencies are saying like 90% of their time is indoors, whether it's work or at home. What we're seeing is the symptoms of mold exposure are increasing. The rate of aerosolized transmissible diseases, such as the pandemic, or nosocomial infection in hospitals, have hardly been affected over decades. I suggest that these either mold allergies or sensitivities, as confirmed over well over a decade ago, in fact, almost 2 decades ago by Quest, with that data compilation, again, 1.5 billion. We're not talking about a study of 200 data points, right? 1.5 billion. If the symptoms of mold exposure are increasing, that means more and more people are becoming aware that something is happening. More and more doctors are becoming more mold literate in treating either an allergy or SEERS. More awareness means there's a whole lot more buildings, whether that be a resident and home ownership, apartment, school, office, government, military housing. There's a lot of buildings out there that are going to need proper decontamination approaches. From the healthcare practitioner standpoint, there's a reason why Dr. Neil Nathan states that when it comes to the most sensitized patients, he's emphasized and will continue to emphasize mold toxicity is the single most common contributing cause of that sensitivity. Mold toxicity is far more common than is currently recognized. Those who are knowledgeable in this field estimate that millions of people are wrestling with this problem, but are entirely unaware of its existence. And the reason for that is the EPA, NIOSH, 5% of buildings were contaminated in the 70s and 80s. By the 90s, people are starting to spend more time indoors, and we're getting a lot smarter in properly diagnosing indoor air contaminants. 35 to 50% of the buildings 10 to 20 years later, right, are now considered microorganism, right, generated contamination, biotoxin, bioaerosol. And then it's translating because more and more doctors are seeing these types of patients. We're talking the scientific evidence of what's being produced in a damp or water damaged building, but now we have the transition to studies that are confirming health issues, and we were getting these published articles as well. So you've got thousands of scientific publications on mycotoxins, endotoxins, actinobacteria being the principal culprits of the inflammatory response. It used to be mold, or the thought of mycotoxins being that significant contributor to that health issue of an occupant. But now it's conclusive, right? And in fact, other than, if you talk with pretty much anybody that's in this industry, most will acknowledge that, yeah, it's a health issue. I'm hopeful that the rest of the curtain can be peeled back and the secret can be completely uncovered, in that we now know everything that grows in a damp or water damaged building, and specific protocols such as the Normie NC RSI NCMP is the right approach to solve it. And in fact, I'll go one step further, that I think the data alone for Sears patients, Dr. Shoemaker, Dr. Andrew Heyman that Doug alluded to earlier, foremost leading authority in this country today, has stated in some of his presentations, and we know this, that 22 to 25% of the population has a genetic predisposition for Sears because of the genetic anomaly, and they don't even know it. Might it be time for the industry to start assuming that when we are going through and assessing from the assessor side and diagnosing and doing inspections of these buildings to determine the degree to which they are water damaged or damp, and then we transition to either hand it off or we're doing the remediation, should we start to assimilate an assumption that regardless of whether the occupant realizes or not, they may be suffering from mold, because the data is pretty clear on that. Almost 4 in 10 people, 25% genetically, 10 to 15% immunologically. Dr. William Nazaroff, I quote this paper quite a bit, Cal Berkeley 2014, Indoor Air. Dr. Nazaroff, Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering at Cal Berkeley. This particular study, this is a great paper for anybody that wants to look it up and just dig into it over a cup of coffee. Talking about the bioaerosol behavior and its effect on human beings is particularly coupled to the particle size in the 0.1 to 10 micron for bioaerosols. In fact, what he further goes into, which I will not hear, it is that 2 or sub 2 micron particle that is the biggest culprit, whether that is a mycotoxin or a mold species or an actinobacteria or an endotoxin, that is of significant concern, because sub 2 micron particles, they now know, are so easily deposited deep into the human lung and therefore into the bloodstream. Now, we don't have to be doctors, right? We don't treat people. But I think that if we can have and increase and develop our knowledge of what the medical community and the scientific community has identified and which is now confirmed, all of us in this industry will be better served to more comprehensively and completely and thoroughly decontaminate these damp and water damaged buildings, such that the end result of our efforts leaves an environment that can support recovery and then certainly wellness long term for the people that are living in these buildings. One of the things that we have that is frustrating to all of us, our clientele, those that we interact with on a daily basis. There are no published standards by the EPA, the NIH, the CDC, various state departments of health on what is a normal amount of mold. And of course, in fairness